President Obama's going to Orlando on Thursday, and he canceled his Wednesday campaign with Hillary in Wisconsin.
What about his tea time?
That's what I thought. When he spoke on Sunday, I thought, oh my gosh, I bet he's going to go play golf. But I looked, and I didn't see any tea time.
Well, there's this other note I wanted to make sure people were aware of. Remember how Tiny Dancer said that Chick-fil-A didn't represent Chicago values?
Right, and they tried to block. I think they have successfully blocked that second Chick-fil-A from opening on Clybourne. It's supposed to open it. I mean, maybe it hasn't opened yet, but...
Following the deadly terrorist attack in Orlando early Sunday morning, employees from a few local Chick-fil-A restaurants went to work to make food for those donating blood to victims. The Christian-owned company is known for being closed nationwide on Sundays, but decided to make an exception following the gruesome shooting.
Now, why hasn't that made the mainstream media? Yeah. Kudos to them.
Maybe one of those enterprising reporters in the Chicago Press Corps, when they happen upon the little fella over at the fifth floor, would like to ask him that question if he'd like to revise and extend his remarks about Chick-fil-A. Yeah, we'll see. Other big news yesterday was made by Donald Trump in his remarks in New Hampshire about the Orlando terrorist attack, as well as what should be done going forward to make sure people are secure in this country and effectively combat radical Islamic terrorism. And it seems like he's pushing Hillary a little bit right, because she was kind of forced to utter a phrase she's not one to utter. That phrase being...
You mean radical Islam?
Radical Islamic terrorism.
Did you just say radical Islam?
She did it. But no, she's still sticking to focus on the assault weapons, and I'm not going to declare war on a religion and the usual left rhetoric. But she did utter that phrase, and I wonder if Trump's aggressive posture had something to do with it. So aggressive that it's inspiring support from perhaps unanticipated quarters like the Phoenix LGBT organization, which endorsed Trump by Twitter yesterday. Well, for more on this, we're happy to be joined by Fox News Channel's Middle East and terrorism expert, as well as a Trump foreign policy advisor. He is Dr. Walid Phares. Dr. Phares, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So Trump's outline yesterday of temporary restrictions on persons emigrating to this country from essentially state sponsors of terror or hotbeds of terrorism, in addition to increased surveillance on mosques where appropriate. Is this something that you helped him to outline?
You know, internal matters we cannot discuss as advisors, but let me tell you one thing. On your show, we've discussed a few months ago, I have projected that Mr. Trump will be basically evolving in his position to become more precise, more strategic from that general ban from 2015. Now he's being very specific in terms of, yes, these countries where the jihadists have control over areas, we are going to put an interim ban, but until, and he said it very clearly, that ban will be lifted when we in America, in Washington, actually, when he becomes the president, the agencies will provide him what the Obama administration did not provide for its own bureaucracy, that is a vetting process. So you can see a very interesting march towards being very precise, and in next speeches, in my understanding, there'll be even naming probably of specific forces that are the problem in the region and here. But what is very important in that speech, yesterday, was the fact that the ideological battle seemed to be waged by Mr. Trump and won. As you just mentioned in the introduction, Secretary Clinton now is saying, I have no problem, calling it radical jihad, radical Islamic, what have you. And yes, that means that the push is happening. And of course, the price was in blood. It was the massacre of Orlando that sent that signal throughout the American civil society that there is something very, very wrong. And Mr. Trump just translated the concerns of the people.
Why do you think President Obama is afraid to say radical Islam?
In my view, that's my personal view. That's not the campaign view. He would not, because unlike with Mrs. Clinton, who's pragmatic and has in the past mentioned the term jihadist and Islamist, last year, she listens to the experts of government, and then she listens to, obviously, the pressure groups that are around the State Department. But President Obama has a different view. From 2009, he had initiated a partnership with the Muslim Brotherhood because he he comes from the perspective that we need to work with what he would envisage as moderate Islamists, like in Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood, Nahda in Tunisia, and or engage with the Iranian regime, the Ayatollah. So it would be difficult for President Obama at the 8th year of his tenure to change and say, no, that's true, there is an Islamist ideology, there is a radical jihadi ideology or so. So I don't think in the remainder of his presidency he will change the wording.
It's very interesting because President Obama and to a large extent Hillary Clinton really obsessed about language. You know, we use language that they would characterize as Islamophobic, then we just do the terrorist bidding for them. They use the rhetoric of a Donald Trump, for example, as a recruiting tool. That's what they say. But it turns out that their language, that the great threat is Islamophobia, has an impact as well. And now we've seen this play out multiple times. San Bernardino, neighbors didn't want to report anything suspicious. Fort Hood, fellow soldiers on the base at Fort Hood didn't want to report anything about Major Hassan. And now the security firm that employed the Orlando killer, the Orlando terrorist, same kind of thing. They didn't want to be perceived as anti-Muslim. So their rhetoric has a material impact as well, doesn't it?
If you allow me to make quick 2 points. Point number one, to dismantle the core of the argument, and then we'll talk about the impact, as you just mentioned. The core of the argument is wrong. And evidence is the same terms that the Obama-Clinton administration deem as generator of Islamophobia. Those terms are used in the Arab and Muslim world. It does not make sense. I met last year with the Grand Imam of Azhar University. He is the equivalent of the Pope for the Sunni Islam. That's the majority of Muslims. And in our conversation, he mentioned the term Islamist and jihadist and radical jihad, et cetera, et cetera. If you go to Egypt, Tunisia, Lebanon, other places in the Middle East, they actually use that terminology because they know that there is a difference between Islamists and jihadists and radical Islamists and regular people. Why is it that the Obama administration and Clinton, for a while, refused to use those terms? It has nothing to do with Islamophobia. It has to do with pressure groups, with Islamist lobbies who are putting pressure on the administration. In the case of President Obama, maybe he's convinced that this terminology basically will produce Islamophobia, and in fact, it is used by Arabs and Muslims. But second point, more important to your point, is that position since 2009 has taken away the tools for law enforcement, for analysts, for agencies to actually determine if we're dealing with a jihadi situation. You're absolutely right. I gave so many lectures to government and to experts, and they all told me, most of them told me, look, we don't have the tool anymore. If we see a narrative, if we see a literature that is jihadist, we cannot report it because there is a ban on that. So President Obama and Secretary Clinton should lift that ban first so we become efficient in finding those bad guys.
I want to ask you about Omar Mateen himself. I mean, to me, he seemed like a loser terrorist wannabe. He called 911 20 minutes.
Wannabe?
Yeah, 20 minutes in the shooting saying, I pledge allegiance to ISIS. He described the Boston bombers as his homeboys. And now we're finding out that he had been visiting this club for 3 years. His ex-wife saying that he's possibly, that he had gay tendencies. And ISIS claimed responsibility for him. Do you think now if they find out that he's gay, they're going to try and take that back?
It's not that simple. Basically, if you take the case of every single jihadist, or 90% at least of the jihadists, you won't find those pure, perfect, sophisticated soldiers of ISIS in each case. Even in the case of 9/11, remember that at least 2 of them were visiting bars the day before. The day before, it was in Florida, as I recall. So the fact that he visited the same nightclub, well, it's either to scout it or, remember, the jihadist or any terrorist would visit the location to see it, to take a look at it. And thirdly, what if he had tendencies? Right. So in this case, he is a jihadist. This aggravated his situation, but he consults with somebody. There is no jihadi on their own. There is no lone wolves and completely isolated. They have to have what we'll call a validation. Somebody must given him a validation, and that's why he's considered that the act he's done was basically because of an ideology that validated his act.
He is Dr. Walid Phares, Fox News Middle East and terrorism expert, Donald Trump campaign advisor. Dr. Phares, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning